Hi everybody, welcome to D&D Optimized, the show where each episode we take a deep dive into one single character build for Dungeons & Dragons 5e and do our best to optimize it for your chosen role to give you the greatest numerical advantage possible. My name's Colby, and thanks for being here. Appreciate having you. So the episode today is going to be a little bit different. I'm still going to do a character build. I'm still going to take a look at the numbers, but there's a bit of a long preamble here. So, I've long wondered which of the strength-based characters, fighters or barbarians, would benefit the most from a sustained damage perspective from what are commonly thought of as two of the strongest feats in the game, the Great Weapon Master feat and the Polearm Master feat, which among power gamers are very commonly used, right, and talked about. Each of the character classes have their own strengths that they bring to the table, fighters and barbarians. And I wanted to do a deep dive to figure out, what the numbers looked like on each, but also answer the question, would there be a way to multi-class this particular character build to try and take advantage of the strengths of both classes? And if so, how would that compare to going just a straight barbarian or straight fighter? And how many levels of each would you take? Would you mostly be a barbarian? Would you mostly be a fighter? So I put together a lot of different builds, did a lot of number crunching, a lot of theory crafting, a lot of spreadsheets and graphs. I had a lot of fun doing it. I came to a conclusion, and I'm going to have a character build, the one that I landed on that I think is the strongest, at least the strongest, towards the late game. I may have broken the game in the process for myself, because this build that I ended up with is ridiculously powerful. So we'll see. We'll see if you agree. We'll find out when we get there. But for now, I hope that you enjoy all of the number crunching and exploring that I did for my own benefit as well as yours. So for those not familiar with them, the Polearm Master feat is fantastic. It basically gives you a way to get an extra attack every turn by using, as a bonus action, the butt of your polearm, and you get to add all of your juicy, plus to damage bonuses with that attack that you may have. So it's very strong. It gives you some other nice features too, but for DPR sake, for sustained damage sake, that's the real benefit. And the Great Weapon Master feat is fantastic because it basically lets you add 10 flat damage when you make an attack with a two-handed weapon, like a polearm, at the expense of -5 to hit. So if you have a high to hit or advantage or some other way of making sure you land those attacks frequently, it's very, very strong and benefits a lot from getting a lot of extra attacks. And so coupled together, they're very strong. You get, once you hit level 5 and you get 2 attacks per turn, you're getting 3 attacks a round that potentially can do an extra 10 damage each just with those 2 feats. That's 30 damage plus the dice, plus your strength bonuses on it, et cetera, et cetera. So very strong, lots of great damage. As far as which class can better take advantage and get more sustained damage out of these 2 feats, each class has different strengths, right? The barbarians are great because of rage, which is going to give you extra damage per attack, and maybe more importantly, though, reckless attacks, which gives you advantage on every attack, therefore making it much more likely that you land those hard-to-hit attacks because of your -5 to hit. They get some other benefits too, brutal criticals, etc., but those are their 2 big ones. The advantages that fighters get are the Great Weapon fighting style, which is nice. It basically adds a little bit of damage. It lets you re-roll, when you get a 1 or a 2 on the weapon attack, on the weapon damage. And they get a lot more ability score increases or feats than other classes do. So you get your strength up more quickly. adding to your hit chance and your damage. And probably the biggest of all is they get more extra attacks at higher levels. So most martial classes get an extra attack at level 5. With a fighter, you get another extra attack at level 11, and even another one at 20 if you ever get there. So those are kind of the different strengths, the different advantages, and so the question is, well, which one then is going to end up pulling ahead in the sustained damage DPR race? As I looked at it, the straight class builds, the Barbarian pretty much just has the upper hand throughout against the fighter. It turns out that advantage on every attack that you get from the Barbarian Reckless Attack really just outpaces any advantage that the fighter can bring by itself, including extra weapon attacks, including a higher strength score earlier on, including more damage from your Great Weapon Master fighting style. Having advantage when you get a plus 10 to every attack, it just ends up being better overall. And so that became fairly obvious fairly quickly as I was crunching the numbers. Then I, however, started to kind of look at, okay, well, are we better off going mostly Barbarian with a little bit of fighter, or mostly fighter with a little bit of Barbarian? Early on, the mostly Barbarian with a fighter dip was better. At about level 8, the mostly fighter with a Barbarian dip catches up, and they're pretty much neck and neck from that point. But once you hit level 14, the fighter just goes supernova. The fighter with a Barbarian dip goes supernova, basically, and leaves everybody else behind, including any other sustained damage build I've ever looked at least at low and medium armor classes. And I think the real reason for that is this. The greatest strengths from the Barbarian come at early levels for the Barbarian. Rage and reckless attacks you get by level 2, right? The strengths of the fighter, primarily the additional ability score increases and the additional attacks, come much later for the fighter. So you need a lot of fighter levels to take advantage of them. So you only need a little bit of Barbarian, and then once you get a lot of fighter, you're really kind of combining the best of both worlds and just going to the moon as far as your sustained damage goes. I thought initially that the Barbarian with a fighter dip would have a big advantage thanks to synergies between Brutal Critical from the Barbarian and the Champion fighter subclass fighter archetype, because Brutal Criticals let you roll more dice when you get a crit, and the Champion archetype lets you get a crit on a 19 or a 20, not just a 20, effectively doubling your critical hit chance. And so I thought you'd be getting a ton of crits, they'd be hitting really hard, this would be really strong. Turns out, for these builds anyway, it didn't have as big an impact as I thought it would, and I mean that's primarily because most of the damage that you're getting from these builds is coming from the flat damage that you add to every attack. Great Weapon Master's plus 10. Rage is 2 to 4. You get your strength bonus, and so the damage that you get from that from those flat bonuses outpace anything that you might get from landing a critical hit and rolling an extra die or two. And so it just when you crunch the numbers, that was the results. And again, for those who don't know, I do post links in the show notes or video description to the math, and I've got all my numbers and graphs and things up there so you can take a look at all of these different builds and see how they do based on enemy armor class, based on level. I found it really fascinating and really enjoyed putting it all together. But so TLDR, if you're going Barbarian with a fighter dip, you're going to have a clear advantage up until about level 8. At which point both the multi-classes kind of are neck and neck till level 14. And after that point, the fighter with the Barbarian dip just far outpaces everything. But both of the multi-class combinations end up doing better than just straight Barbarian or straight fighter. So that's good to know. All right. With all of that said, that long preamble, we're going to then focus our build this episode on the fighter with a Barbarian dip, or the Fightarian, as I'm calling him. Yet another ugly name. So let's get into the level build. All right, at level 1, your race should be variant human. If you're going optimal, if you're not, take something else. But that free feat that variant humans get is just too good. You need 2 feats, and it just really gives you a nice head start. So the feat that you would want to take would be Polearm Master. That would let you get basically another attack every turn from the get-go with the butt of your polearm. For your skills, assuming point buy, you're going to want to buy a 15 strength, and then you get your +1. Use your +1 from variant human there, so you'd have 16. A 15 constitution for hit point purposes, +1 again, so you'd have 16. I would go 14 dex. That's going to help you with your armor class and with your initiative, among other things. And then, after that, do what you want. For equipment, I'd recommend getting gold and buying things, because the fighters start with some stuff. Well, you're not going to be able to get everything that you want, namely medium armor. For most of this character's career, you'll be wearing medium armor, and you don't really get an option to start with medium armor with standard fighter equipment. So get gold, buy yourself some scale mail. It's only 50 gold. And it's medium armor, and then you can get a pike for 5 gold. You're going to want a polearm of some kind, halberd or a glaive, or a little more expensive, but they're 20. And other than that, you can spend your gold on whatever necessities you have, clothes, rations, explorer's pack, all that kind of stuff. For your fighting style, as a fighter, you get a fighting style. You're going to choose great weapon fighting. Essentially, what this is, as I've kind of mentioned already, is when you're using a great weapon, a 2-handed weapon, and you roll the dice for damage, if you get a 1 or a 2, you can re-roll it. You have to keep the second roll, but when you crunch the numbers, what that ends up meaning is on the D10 portion of the hit, instead of the weapon die being an average of 5.5, it's going to be an average of 6.3, so about almost 1 point of damage more per attack, and the butt of the polearm is just a D4, and so on average, instead of a 2.5, it'll be a 3. So you get a little more damage, a little over 1 total by taking that, but it's going to be the best for you, I think, at least from a sustained damage perspective. Moving on, at level 2, you get Action Surge, and everybody knows Action Surge is amazing. It lets you basically take another action on your turn, and so for the purposes of sustained damage, you'd take another attack. Later on, you'd be taking 2 attacks when you get an extra attack. Later on, you'll be taking 3 attacks, right? You don't get an extra bonus action. It's not like a whole new turn. It's just an extra action. So keep that in mind. But it just lets you, now this character is going to excel both on the sustained damage charts and on the Nova or burst damage charts. At level 3, you get a martial archetype. I'm highly recommending the Rune Knight if your Dungeon Master allows Unearthed Arcana. Check it out on D&D Beyond or wherever you get your D&D information. The Rune Knight, really cool. Basically, among other things, it's going to let you grow in size once per long rest for a minute, and when you do that, you get to add a d6 to your weapon attacks. Later that becomes a d8. And so that's just going to be great for your sustained damage. If you get some other cool abilities too, some little runes and things that let you do some utility or defensive stuff, they're cool. They're kind of like spells. If you can't take the Rune Knight, I'd probably go Champion or Battle Master. Champion if you're going to be doing a lot of Barbarian levels to take advantage of brutal criticals. Otherwise, probably Battle Master. At level 4, you get an ability score increase or a feat. I'm recommending that you take the Great Weapon Master feat here. And again, just to review, Great Weapon Master, among other things, is going to let you add 10 damage to any weapon attack you land at the cost of a -5 to hit. You can choose to sort of activate the feat, right? But plus 10 to hit, -5, and of course there is a level at which it makes sense numerically to not use that feat, right? Because your chance of hitting becomes so low that you're going to be better off just not using that, so that you can at least hit them. And if you look at my spreadsheets, you'll notice that I have a little cell that's colored yellow, and that indicates the enemy armor class at which you should turn off the feat, as it were. But very, very strong. At level 5, you get an extra attack. So now when you take the attack action, you get to attack twice. That's fabulous. So now you're getting 3 attacks per turn, right? At level 6, you are going to take your first level in Barbarian. This is fabulous because you get rage, and for rage, when you're not wearing heavy armor, you get extra damage per weapon attack, melee weapon attack. It's 2, and that's where it's going to be capped for this character build. It's not going up because you're not taking a lot of Barbarian levels, but 2 extra damage. And more importantly, really, for you, it gives you resistance to all non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So any weapon damage, basically, or other, bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, if it's non-magical, you have resistance to it, meaning you're going to take half damage. And that's very important because this character is going to be getting hit a lot. I'll explain why in a moment. But first, let's do a damage report at level 6. For an enemy with a 10 armor class, you're going to be doing about 46 damage per round. And against an enemy with 15 armor class, you'll be doing 29. Pretty good, not amazing, but strong. And as I mentioned, coincidentally, the Barbarian, primarily Barbarian with a dip into Fighter, has a clear advantage here. They're at 58 and 38 damage per round, respectively. So yeah, that's fantastic. Now, at level 7, you're going to be taking your second level into Barbarian, and you pick up Reckless Attack. This is really the main reason why we are in Barbarian at all. The other main reason, I guess I should say. Having advantage on your attacks, as I've mentioned, is so strong when you are using Great Weapon Master and getting a -5 to hit, especially against higher enemy armor classes. Something to keep in mind. Reckless Attack, in case you didn't know. At the beginning of your turn, you choose to attack recklessly, meaning that you get advantage on all of your attacks that you take that turn, at the cost of giving your enemies advantage against you when they attack you. So this will essentially be like you casting a taunt spell on your Dungeon Master, because now all the monsters have advantage, and it's too tempting. They want to hit you. It's easier to hit you than pretty much any other character. So in all likelihood, they will be attacking you, especially when they see later on, especially how much damage you're doing to them and all of their friends. So be prepared to be getting targeted a lot. You don't have a really high AC here, right? You've got medium armor and a +2 dex, so you're probably at like a 16 AC. Maybe if you've picked up some better medium armor along the way, you might be like an 18, but it's not amazing. And they have advantage. So they're going to be hitting you a lot, the monsters that is. Strongly encourage you when you are planning your adventuring party for the adventure in which you are going to play this character, that you convince one of your friends to roll a cleric or a paladin focused on healing, somebody that can help keep you alive, because you are going to need it. You're probably going to be getting knocked unconscious a lot. Even with your resistance to non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, you're going to be getting hit a lot, taking a lot of damage. All right, moving on. At level 8, Barbarian level 3. This is the last level of Barbarian you're going to be taking. You're here for the primal path, and you're going to be taking the path of the Zealot. That's what I'd recommend strongly for 2 reasons. One, Divine Fury is nice once per turn, not every weapon attack, but once per turn. On the first hit that you make against a monster, you get to do an extra d6 of damage, plus half of your Barbarian levels, rounded down. I'm assuming it doesn't actually specify in the player's handbook, but I'm assuming rounded down. And since we're done with Barbarian levels here, that's just an extra 1, right? Because you're a Barbarian 3. So a d6 plus 1, that's nice. Once per turn, it's a little extra. The main reason actually that we're here, and I don't usually talk about non-damage features when we are doing a sustained DPR build, but this is important. You get the Warrior of the Gods feature, and this lets someone cast a Revivify or a Raise Dead, or some other Resurrect spell on you, without having to expend the expensive material components that always accompany those spells, like a diamond that's worth 300 gold or something like that. You're probably going to need this more often than you'd like, and your companions will dislike you a lot less if they don't have to be constantly spending 300 gold every time you go down, because you're going to be going down. Unless your dungeon master is just really, really, really nice. Or you have a really strong support character, cleric or something like that. All right, at level 9, you're back to fighter. So you are a fighter 6 at level 9, and you get an ability score increase. That's fantastic that at a level 6 fighter you get an ability score increase. So you're going to bump your strength. Your strength will now be an 18, giving you +4 to hit and +4 to damage. Damage report for level 9. Against a 10 AC, you're climbing fast here. You're doing 75 damage per round on average. And against a 16 enemy AC, you are doing 55 damage per round. Again, as I mentioned, by now, the Barbarian with the fighter dip is about the same. It's actually 1 point higher in both instances, but for all intents and purposes, the same, right? At level 11, fighter 8, I skipped a little, you get another ability score increase, and so you're going to bump your strength to 20. Now you're capped, essentially, for a +5 bonus to your strength. Going to skip a few levels. There's some nice defensive and buffing features that you pick up along the way here, but they don't really do much for your sustained DPR. At level 14, here we go. You are a fighter level 11, and this is where you pick up another extra attack. So when you make an attack as your action, instead of attacking twice, you get to attack 3 times. Keep in mind, again, plus your bonus action, hitting them with the butt of your polearm, so you're getting 4 attacks per turn, every turn. And again, if you use action surge, you get to take your attack action again, so it would actually be 3 plus 3 plus your bonus the 7 attacks in a single turn. this is where you go to the moon. And usually I do a damage report at 13, but I waited to 14 here because it's such a significant difference maker to go one more level. Coincidentally, so was Blade Singer, but I stuck with 13 there. I should have buffed the Blade Singer numbers by waiting till 14, but I didn't. Anyway, damage report. At level 14, this Fightarian is doing 112 damage per round to an enemy with a 10 AC. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And against an enemy with a 17 AC, they're still doing 84 damage per round. If they use Action Surge, it's 196 damage per round and 145 respectively. Yeah, that's stupid. To give you an idea of how overpowered this is, okay, if you were to try and solo a challenge rating 14 monster, which you should not be able to do, right? The way that the difficulty of monsters, they use the challenge rating system, right? And you're not supposed to be able to solo a challenge rating monster that's the same level as you, essentially. It's more like half of your level. If you're level 14 and you're fighting a challenge rating monster of 14, it's triple the deadly encounter threshold. So it's way beyond what you should be able to do, right? You could do a level 7, a challenge rating 7 monster, and it would be considered hard, but doable, not deadly. Okay, so for argument's sake, though, let's say you do try and take on a challenge rating 14 monster at this level, which we're going to use an adult black dragon, challenge rating 14. All by yourself. If you win initiative and get the first attack, and survive one round, so you get a second round of attacks. You know what? You probably don't even need to survive initiative, win initiative, because the black dragon to you will do, even if it uses its legendary actions against you, it would bite, claw, and tail attack, and it can only use one legendary action because there's only one of you. It can only use one legendary action per enemy character, right? So all 4 of those attacks, it would do a total, on average, to you of 58 damage. And you would be resistant to all of that, so halved at 27. Even if it used its breath attack and you failed your save, your dex save, which you probably wouldn't, because as a fighter, you have an advantage against a save. If you fail a save, you can re-roll, and you've got a decent dex, so you've got a good likelihood of succeeding on that dex save. But for argument's sake, you fail your save. The dragon uses its breath weapon. You would take that plus a legendary action tail attack, 61 damage. So you take 61 damage. At this level, you have 133 hit points. So even if the dragon recharged its breath weapon and you failed your dex save again, you'd take another 61, 122. So you're still alive after 2 rounds. But on the flip side of that, you, to the black dragon with a 19 armor class, assuming you have your action surge up, and if you're fighting a black dragon by yourself, you will. You would most likely, on average, do enough damage to kill it in 2 rounds. Barely, but you'd get there. So, yeah. Level 14 Fightarian versus adult black dragon. Advantage Fightarian. Either way, the fight's probably over in 2 or 3 rounds. It's a Mike Tyson heavyweight match. So yeah, that's absurd. But we're moving on. At level 15, you are a fighter 12. You get another ability score increase or feat. I would probably take the tough feat that would give you 2 extra hit points for each level that you are. And so that scales, and it's nice, a way to boost your HP. That, or maybe just bump your constitution up to an 18. Skipping ahead to level 17, fighter 14, again, you'd get another ability score increase, or feat. I'd probably bump your constitution again, regardless. Damage report at level 17. It's not too different. You haven't done much to increase your damage, really. So against a 10 AC, you're doing on average 114 damage per round, and against an 18 AC, you're doing 84 damage per round. Final thoughts. I kind of feel like I've lost my innocence. It's not that bad. Admittedly, this build gets outpaced at higher ACs, at like 18 and up, by last week's episode, the Blade Singer, which is my favorite. Of course, the Blade Singer doesn't have Action Surge, but they have Wizard spells, so arguably even better, right? And higher AC, better survivability. Well, they don't get resistance to damage, so maybe not. Regardless, yeah, at lower ACs, this character, lower to medium, I should say, ACs, this character does insane damage, and even at higher ACs. And speaking of which, if for some reason you're going to play a campaign where you're starting a character at like level 16, 17 and playing a high level campaign, you could do this build, but instead of taking Variant Human, go Elf of some sort, or Half Elf, and then pick up Elven Accuracy as a feat. And it's much worse up until really high levels, when you finally can get your strength up to where it needs to be, because you're so behind by not getting the extra feat and by having to take an extra feat, Elven Accuracy. But since you have advantage on every attack, Elven Accuracy is going to let you roll 3 times, and you're even stronger. It's in the graphs. I'm not going to talk about the numbers here. Right. So again, if you're doing a lower level campaign, and this play style is appealing to you, I'd recommend going, Barbarian primarily with dips into Fighter. Go Fighter to level 4 levels of Fighter. So like Barbarian to 5, Fighter to 4, and then continue on with Barbarian, because you want to get that extra ability score increase to bump your strength. That's going to be the best numerical advantage for you. Right. Again, at low to mid armor class, even before 14, this build outpaces just about anything, with the exception of the Pamlock occasionally. And then at higher ACs, there are some that outpace it. But, personally, I hate this. I hate this build, but I love it at the same time. Obviously, one thing that I love about this game is creating characters that feel really strong, really powerful. Same with any RPG, role-playing game that I play. Anytime that I have the opportunity to feel like a real hero, a real champion, it makes it that much more fun for me. I love the idea of being able to solo a dragon, like in the stories and legends out of, King Arthur and things. That's awesome. But it has the serious threat of unbalancing your campaign and your encounters. So, with that in mind, let's discuss DM tips. Preventing rest, of course, will always be effective against this character. If you find that someone at your table is playing this build or something like it, and really trivializing your encounters, and or upsetting the rest of your players because they feel, they pale by comparison. Keeping them from resting is going to make them have to pick and choose when they're going to use their rage, when they're going to use their action surge, which is going to significantly reduce their damage and also significantly reduce their survivability. And speaking of survivability, honestly, I think my number one DM tip here would be just kill this character. I mean, they're going to be easy to hit. Yeah, they'll be resistant to damage, and you can work around that, right? You can have enemies that do magic damage. There's plenty of them out there. But, focus all firepower on the Superstar Destroyer. If you take them out, they won't be doing so much damage. And it might make them exercise a little more caution and not cause them to use reckless attacks every single turn, thereby significantly reducing their damage output. I think actually that could create some great memorable role-playing moments for your players as well. If you have a character who's dying all the time, right? And going to meet their god. He's a zealot barbarian, keep in mind. So he's going to he or she is going to meet their god and having this moment of like, sorry, I died again. And then, their cleric is kind of going, oh man, this character went down again. I got to bring him back. He goes into Valhalla and his god says, no, your mission isn't finished, and sends him back, that kind of stuff. It could be really cool. Other things you can do, obviously, find a way to keep, to let rage expire on this character by either ensnaring them and staying out of range of their weapon attack so that they can't attack or be attacked. If that happens for a full turn, they're going to lose rage, or otherwise, disabling them with a stun or a paralyze or something so they can't take that action or get attacked, and then they'll drop rage. That, again, will significantly reduce their survivability. If all else fails, just increase the difficulty of the encounters. Maybe instead of one dragon, you have two. One for the Phytarian and one for everybody else. Be careful, of course, with increasing the difficulty too much, because if the rest of your party isn't, super optimized and this character goes down, you could TPK everybody, right, and cause everyone to wipe, which can be problematic. But at the same time, of course, as a DM, you should never be afraid to do that. The game isn't very fun if it never feels like there's a threat or a challenge. So anyway, that's our show for the week. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. As always, please subscribe, like, share, comment on either the podcast version or the YouTube version of the show. I really appreciate it. And, find ways to reach out to us. We're on social media. The email is dndoptimized@gmail.com. Or you can comment in the show notes or in the YouTube comment section, of course. Always happy to interact with all of you that are listening. And of course, if you ever have a build that you would like me to do an episode on, just send that over to me. Let me know some details about what that build will look like, and I will do my best to optimize it for you. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.